begin with a prayer from my sister Lauren Proper Breland, who has blessed us in other spaces, and I'm very excited that she's here with us today to share her beautiful words and energy and poetry with us. So Lauren, if you can hear me, I welcome you to come and start this conversation with your prayer, with our prayer.
Much love. At this point in time, over my shoulder is a wonderful rainstorm coming up. So you might hear a little whoosh and a swoosh behind, but maybe that's just my natural, soundtrack, if you will. But I'm hoping that it keeps me on with you. I'm doing audio from my iPad because I don't know how to fix the audio in this new camera I have. I deserve, and I'm praying for an intern. My name is Lauren Breland, nickname Proper. I was asked to open this discussion and, provide a platform for your three guest speakers to move the conversation, to set the tone, to bring awareness, and more importantly, and let me know if I'm speaking too fast for translation, more importantly, to set the tone of blessings, to be in this space, in this time, to be able to have this kind of dialogue anywhere in itself is just a grace. It's a grace. We're talking about reimagining education, and in this particular micro conference about the turning or returning to the sacred. And one of the most important things that is sacred, that perhaps brought you here today or allows you to linger on after the first conference to, get it or get in it, whatever your preference is, much love and blessings. It is, I had been a nicotine smoker for 42 years. I wasn't proud about it, but I didn't shy away from it. I would ask for a cigarette if I ran out, or have a lighter, but I keep the mints on me, keep it nice. That was my thing. And off and on, I had throughout my 42 years attempted to quit smoking. And I tried every which way and really gave it honest. I went to a hypnotist. This is my first real attempt 20 years into this relationship. And it worked. First of all, I was amazed because I find myself to be of such strong mind. How could I be hypnotized? But for 3 months, there was no desire for nicotine. And I moved on, but I had a family tragedy, murder, suicide. And on the way to speak with that mother, stopped by the store and picked up 2 packs. Began again. I tried patches, Nicorette, blah, 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 breathing, food, everything in its place. And it's funny because I go through Facebook every now and then and I see that memory of when I attempted and how 10 days in, 2 hours in, blah, blah. I was walking on my way to a pre-COVID test for a medical procedure I had to have. And I missed the bus and I'm cussing and fussing. You know what I mean? And I'm running. I was like, this winch saw me, blah, blah, blah. And I got winded to the point where I could not run, cuss, and fuss and catch my bus. Anyway, I said, and fuck these cigarettes. And from that moment forward, and it amazes me. It amazes me. From that moment, from I said those words, I have not touched or had a desire for a cigarette. If I'm around people who are smoking, the smell it's not offensive. It has nothing to do with anything. It's so amazing. It's as if I never smoked. That's how far removed it is from me. And all along, all of these attempts that I had been doing were prompts at reimagining how I'm going to get them out of my life, how I'm going to stop. But I never reimagined that moment once I did. And that's what kind of like brings folks back in and around to this concept now. Something magical happened. There was an action of faith that came through. Some level of aspiration. I can do this. I can aspire into this. I can understand this. So here are some notes ever so quickly that I took down because it's an evolution. Don't doubt what you know to be true. What is, and I think we breached on this a little bit when we were in our flirting segment, was about the freedom to discuss, on that particular type of level, something that was so personal. And your thoughts, your dreams, your wishes for this society, for the future of breathing is very personal to you. And in order to find a place where you could feel as if you could freely launch your thoughts, gather mates, and move forward is a beautiful thing. So let me just read from my notes on that particular point. It's what came to me when I was asked. Don't doubt what you know to be true. Our greatest challenge is reimagining conversations with other human beings in our changed state of mental grace, your heightened dexterity or your ability to see on another realm. It's kind of scary when you're walking out, but you're there. And so let it go, evolve equally outside of us to match the change within us. Reimagine that can happen. Almost every mind has full capacity to change. Rare the minds that can physically escape the restricted, see you as you was or as you are now environments and grow enough to release new thoughts with new people, not trusting change to come inside those we know. You've returned to a space where the imaginative thoughts are glorified, respected, and appreciated in a trusting environment. Nature of situations stemming from this dominant energy is a tune-up, a test of stability. Realigning your values brings a fresh sense of mental stability. What are you going to do with this change that you have been capturing since you became engaged in reimagining education? Where are you now? Where are you trying to get where are you centering in on? After after your freshman year, now you're zooming in. What is your focus? Where are you bringing it? Where are you taking that energy? And be sure to take time to hear your inner voice. Your life experiences and all you've learned is what you need to calibrate that internal compass that's shifting in you now. You're ready to make moves, literally and figuratively. The knowledge you have power to change your world is taking hold. Pull all the tabs and see what's in store. Use flexibility in building your thoughts and adapt and release those firm attachments to outcomes. Let it flow. Step out on that faith. Deliver it. Your intellect and your communication, both internal and external, gleam with clarity now. Now is the time to cut through any dusty, tangled webs, reveal the core of the issue. And some of these words are coming from a pull that I had to gather guidance from where I am spiritually. And then once your mind is set, speak fearlessly. Trust your message as being heard as you intended it to be. And to the leaders here, instincts to pull back your beliefs and reduce your determination, because folks won't get it. It's a beautiful thing to be past that. And we certainly, you know, I'm one of those people that like to sit on the knee and gather knowledge. So that's where I'll be while you're talking. And I look forward to being graced with your wisdom. There's no longer a luxury anyway, you gotta share. You gotta share. And we get to hear. Much love and blessings. To those who are attending, release the burden you've been carrying and walk lightly into your new era. Everything in life is impermanent. Just like we expect seasons to change, you need to expect yourself to change and allow these individuals to, you know, give you some guide to transitions, if you will. Everybody lives in a different region. Everybody has different changes in their seasons, but you need to understand where you go and you evolve. So let it go, but be gentle with yourself. And you may fight your inner being harder than anything else, but what's sacred is escaping what the contemporary culture thoughts are and moving into your independent thought and like-minded folks as you. To myself, I had to learn that my words are more aligned with purpose than I think. And to all of us and this was a pull, the ancient divine force of receptivity and creation pulses within your being. Let it move you. And in closing, it could be inciting to reach well-reasoned conclusions, prompting us to want to share it far and wide. I know it's kind of like, you know, when you first get Harry Potter and the wand, just, you know, but we just have to put the wand down now and just take some lesson and see how we can best serve the magic that's within us. And on that note, I invite you to soothe and to heal your being by being led and just being here. Much love and blessings, everybody. Much love and blessings.
Much love. Thank you so much, Proper.
You're welcome.
And from here, we'll transition into the conversation with Bio, David, and Sophie, and starting with a little bit of silence and welcoming either of you, any of you, David, Bio, or Sophie, to break the silence with whatever your heart is wanting to come forth with. And you may begin with a story, with a question, with a comment, really anything. And we're going to flow in this emergent conversation format for the first portion of the call, and then segue into some questions and answers. So if any questions or comments or thoughts come up, either type them in the chat or set them aside for that period. And for the first section, we're going to give the space to David, Bio, and Sophie. So with that, the silence begins, and you're welcome to come in as you feel called.
Well, I've been spotlighted, so I guess that's the universe's cue to say, well, you got to go first. I greet everyone and my siblings here, Sophie and David. Much love to you. Well, I don't, as maybe for introductory comments, I would first want to say that is what Elder Lauren just shared was probably the most ecstatic definition of a prayer that I've ever sat with. many of you know that I grew up in a very Christian environment, Pentecostal, charismatic, demon bashing, tongue swirling faith that I grew up in. To pray was to be above the elements, let me just put it that way, was to transcend the material goings on in the world around you. I was very close to one of the richest pastors in the world. In fact, when my father died, he took me in as a son. He founded a university that I actually went to as an undergrad and graduated into and became a professor in. And so he loved me dearly, as I did him. But he was one of the richest, biggest Pentecostal evangelical figures on the planet, in Africa at least. And I held him in awe as this spiritual figure, as this master of prayer. But there was something that was a worm somewhere that was always itching. I was wanting something different, and I couldn't quite put my hands on it. One day we traveled in his private jet, no less, to David, take it in. we traveled in his private jet to a governor's place. And they rolled out the red carpet. I held his briefcase, walked right beside him. He was a god, so to speak, ironically. They took him to the guest house for the government, and I stayed in a room just adjacent his. And we wore suits because that's what you do as a Christian evangelical. You wear a suit, even though it's burning in tropical Africa. You wear a suit because Jesus apparently wore suits during his ministry. And I remember at 7 a.m. in the morning, he woke up and I was there by his side. And he said to me, there is no hot water in the bathroom somehow. So I would like you to go and speak to the people and get hot water for me to have a bath. And I remember bringing hot water in a bucket in this rich and luxurious government house into his bathroom. And for the first time since I was a little kid, because I'd always been in his church, for the first time ever, I saw his toothbrush. And I don't know, it's like the aftermath of Hiroshima and the people in Japan hearing the voice of their God emperor on the radio for the first time and realizing that he's also human. I saw his toothbrush and I saw his toothpaste and I realized he's just as human. He's just as imbricated and as entangled and as shitty and as messy as I am. And it was a sacred moment, a coming home, a soothing of the itch that had haunted me for years. So when I hear Elder Lauren speak about cussing and fussing and hypnotism and miracles out of nowhere and offering that as a prayer, I suddenly realize again and again, as if for the first time, that to pray is not to rise above the elements. To pray is to be imbricated, is to touch the things that mark our bodies, is to come into contemplative ecstasy with the things that are always part of us and part of how we move and breathe and be in the world and become in the world. It is not to be above, it is to be between. And maybe that's what I'll say to break this beautiful, awkward silence as I speak and welcome my dear siblings. Thank you.
Well, for me, I don't know by what luck or magic I get the goodness and gift of sharing conversation with such bodacious creatures as yourselves, so elegant and so eloquent. I think I would say maybe that since you mentioned prayer and since we were fed and nourished by Proper's praying, for myself, first and foremost, prayer is simply talking to the world rather than talking about the world, talking to things rather than talking about things behind their back, as it were, as if the things themselves are not listening, as if the air itself is not aware of our resonant voice, as if the ground is not feeling our steps and attuning to each thing we say. We talk about the weather, we talk about the place, but I'll just say this holy place where I find myself now, I'm in the upper Rio Grande Valley, red earth polka dotted with low juniper trees and pinon pines. And I'm in the foothills of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, upslope, big ponderosa pine forests and huge aspen groves. And this is the high desert foothills of the Sangres, but high desert land sprouting with pueblos, all the Puebloan peoples of this region, the Tewa, Tiwa, Toa speaking peoples who tend and have cared for this earth for so long in this place. But this place also tended, cared for by the coyotes who wake us up with their yipping and yapping every night, and the ravens squawking their dark circles and swoops overhead, and those aspen groves I was mentioning upslope, and desert hares and bobcat and the crickets. Bless your souls, these crickets and cicadas now coming out and rattling the air with their resonant bodies. Itself a kind of spell that comes over the land. But we've had these surging wildfires off just across the valley in the Jemez Mountains. And behind us, behind the Sangre de Cristo, behind the first ridge above me, huge wildfires, scorching the air and the soils, animals fleeing, and smokes. I'm sure many of you have been experiencing analogous things, and in this weird time in the world, the smoke filling the valley. And it occurs to me that in these fires, there's a lot of sage going up in smoke. There's lots of juniper and cedar going up in smoke. It's like, you know, when you smudge yourself before a ceremony with some burning sage. Well, it's like the whole valley is being smudged. The whole ecology or region entering into sacred time, into this rich trance of the holy, of the sacred. That's the smoke that blurs the gaze of the mountains across the way, gazing back at me, but I see them only through that glimmering haze of smoke. We're being smudged, the whole land entering into sacred time.
Thank you, David and Bio and Proper. And I'm feeling something come up, which is that I'm feeling the smoke, this glaucous haze that's both initiating, baptizing the land, but also trying to wake it up to its agony. And I'm thinking about how from the age of 13 onwards, I smoked until I was 21. probably like 30 cigarettes a day, hand rolled eventually. And and even when I was like seriously ill, like in and out of the hospital, like I'd get out of the hospital and like sneak away and smoke immediately. It was like a very strange habit. And I didn't like to do it with other people. It wasn't even social. It was something I would do outside. And I was thinking about how when the fire is raging, it is cleaning, it's doing something, but nothing can be born in the midst of the fire, in the midst of the smoking. It is the actual event of the clearing. And so all the time I was smoking, I was keeping this new cosmogony, this new genesis of a new story at bay. I was staying inside this like chrysalis of trauma and keeping it there, hidden underneath all this wafted smoke. And when I quit, I quit cold turkey. I knew that I couldn't quit in any kind of gradual way. I'm a very extreme person. I'm hyperbolic in many different ways. I either had to do it cold turkey or not at all. And it was all of the trauma, all of the anxiety, all of the intense kinetic energy that I had no idea where to put came back all at once. And I had no idea what to do with it. And I've been raised by pretty animist parents who love mantra, Tibetan mantras and Buddhist mantra, Catholic prayers, rosaries. I've been given a lot of prayers and like bead murmuring, and it didn't do anything. Had no root system. I couldn't tie me into the world. I was fractionating. I could feel my nervous system just beginning to like spike. And how I got through it was I started walking compulsively. I would walk probably 20 miles a day. And as I was walking, I would notice scat, and I would notice shit, and I would notice animals, and I would notice the animals attached to that shit. And I started like creating like a topology of scat, like sacred scat, and like realizing that everything was attached to its own bullshit. And you could actually see how it was tied into the ground where it was by its poop. And so and my prayers started to be like animals tied to their shit, tied to the ground. And my prayers weren't words, they weren't sacred sayings, they were actual beings. And when I would begin to feel myself panic, I would start murmuring these names of these beings. I would say like crown vetch, like motherwort, mugwort, blue heron, red-tailed hawk, golden eagle, like raccoon, woodchuck, muskrat, and just begin to go through them again and again and again, so that my prayers were kind of this like obsessive compulsive rooting of myself into these beings and their beautiful intelligence about how to weave themselves into a food web, not with food, but with their excrement. And I've been thinking lately, like we think of praying as being, you know, declamatory. It's in some way a human performance for other humans. What if it was learning how to turn ourselves into shit and weave our shit into a complex food web again? What if prayer was about like a kind of scatological effort of graphing relationships by what they produce and what they eat? Yeah, and that was how I quit smoking. So Proper, thank you so much for sharing that. I do also understand that moment where it's like your cells decide to quit. Like your brain is never going to decide to quit. It has to like come on some kind of molecular level. Thank you, everyone.
Well, and Sophie and Proper, to say to you, sisters, that around here, smoke is also used in a very clearly sacred manner, particularly by our brothers and sisters who are native to this terrain. Something about smoke, making the invisible visible, making evident this flux of the rich, meaning-filled plenum of air, and taking in the smoke and then breathing it out. So it's this binding of my inside to the inside of the world, and to the same breath that the ravens are inhaling and exhaling within. Something about smoke is so darn sacred. And perhaps that's why we're drawn back and back to it in times when we're feeling so cut off.
I finally realized that it was a relationship that I was having. And so I call it a divorce because truly I'm not a quitter. So I had to change up how I approached it. And once I realized that this relationship was failing me, you know, in certain areas where it certainly gratified me in others, there's that calming of well, as we know, when you stop smoking, get into your breathing exercises just because of the relaxing of the drawing in and the drawing out. And sometimes the ceremonial aspects of it, David, yes. You know what I mean? So I'm looking for those things to put into its place. I smoke my essence here and there, but I'm trying to save my lungs. Your girl messed around and was smoking 42 years.
Oh.
I was a good partner. I was dedicated. I was loyal. I was there for nicotine every day, ride or die. Yeah. So I had to divorce it. And I also think as you all move in to now this discussion that you're going to be, having as we're returning into a sacred space, is that in order to get to that particular place, there has been some kind of practice, or there has been intermittent experiences. As I said, I had been trying to really quit or stop smoking in different vices in different ways over a period of time. It didn't just, unlike, God bless you, Sophie, stop overnight, but it had to stop totally. I couldn't do the patch. I'm trying to get rid of nicotine. But so that's how you get to this particular point where there is transitions, there's learning curves. Now at this point in time, I apply all of those particular things that I learned over the course of time that I tried when I was attempting to quit smoking, that I had to divorce myself of that relationship of smoking and moving away. And here's why, but then filling that space. And a lot of your listeners, including me today, are moving away from traditional thoughts or thoughts that you were only exposed to for quite some time. And the freedom of time and space that's afforded here to expand, just, without any kind of recourse, moving on, and just really understanding and enjoying the freedom of dialogue. So I think that's where reimagining starts first, even as you're trying to flirt. It's reimagining that dialogue and opening up that conversation. And we're blessed. Much love and blessings. We certainly look forward.
I'm feeling a little bit envious of your relationship with smoke because I haven't had that relationship with smoke. I'm almost regretting it. Like, why didn't I take this up?
Light an incense.
Why was I the choir boy that I was? But I feel in my body, and this speaks about the multiple dances and movements that the world has that suggest that the world is too promiscuous to fit neatly into a certain box or category, that it dismisses categories, that everything is a rehearsal. Because when I think about smoke, I think about giant mountains of refuse dumps on my street and the plumes of smoke just rising from it, and how we would curse at that. And of course, what was dumped in these sites were American products that were supposed to be recycled, but were actually brought to us, you see. But probably the most bone-shattering memory of smoke is my family running on the streets of Kinshasa in the Democratic Republic of Congo, now previously called Zaire, in wartime, and trying to evade soldiers because our home had just been broken through and were almost shot with these guns. And we had to steal away into the night to prevent, these renegade soldiers from killing us. And we used smoke somehow. It was the smoke that kept us safe. It was the tires burning on the street that became our fugitive cover. So we could steal into gutters and back alleys and creep onto the streets and find our way into the Nigerian embassy.
Wow.
And so I feel really drawn to the fugitivity of smoke, right? That it will not be fully named or known, that it is at once puerile and perverse and sacred simultaneously. And it is an invitation in the same way it is the sacred. It is an invitation to hide away from the burning light or the burning glare of a surveillance state. That's the smoke saved us that day. The smokes on the plumes of smoke on the street, behind which we crept into the Nigerian embassy. And I'm just sitting with that right now. Sitting with that fugitivity and maybe what its lessons are for us. Yeah.
I like that you draw attention to the polluted aspect, the impurities of smoke. And also I think of the magician who needs to utilize the smoke in the performance in order to create the mechanics of the magic, the transformation, switching one world out for another. But if a new world is going to come into being, we're going to need a lot of smoke, perhaps, for this to come about. And I've been doing a lot of research, as I always am, into the real political spiritual context of Rabbi Yeshua, Jesus. And I've been fascinated with how all of his original first strata metaphors of the earliest texts associated with him, what he calls sacred are things that inside his culture were impure. A woman hiding leaven in bread, 3 impure things. A woman, the act of deceit, and leaven. The kingdom of God is like children who at the time were seen as nobodies. This idea of children as being precious and pure, it was not true at the time. They were considered, they might not make it to adulthood. They were going to be they were going to take your food and your time, they might not make it. So the kingdom of God it's like a mustard seed, it's like a weed. And so I've been thinking of impurities as being the place where the sacred has been hidden. And it's like the smoke coming out of these dung heaps. The smoke that is this materiality of the stuff we cannot escape. It's the inescapability of this culture that we pretend we can disappear the waste, but we can't. It'll always thread its way back into the air. So I was thinking, like, what would my modern, if we were going to rewrite the Beatitudes now, and not in some precious way, but really trying to root ourselves back into that original understanding of impurity as being the container for the sacred, I think maybe we would say the kingdom is like smoke. The kingdom is like a cigarette. The kingdom is like these dung heaps producing these wafting chemical miasma.
Right. Right. Right.
I'd like to bring another figure into the conversation. Was just pondering in the 10 minutes before we got on this enigma that we call the sacred, and realizing, Dave, what what for me is the sacred. Certainly I've got this sense that's been with me, you know, for a couple decades now, that there's some new shape of the sacred, some new texture and rhythm and shape of the sacred that is trying to be born, struggling to be born through all our work, through the work of our hands and our voices, and our crafting and our dancing. Something strangely fresh and strange. But what comes to me most viscerally is the sense that the sacred, something to do with the encounter with another style of sentience, the encounter with another creature, another plant, another body that is richly sensate, sentient, but in a form or shape weirdly different from my own. And something sparks between us, like a recognition of otherness, but in some weird way, we share it in common, as if like the earth is encountering and looking out at itself through two entirely different sets of eyes or entirely different sets of senses. It's that moment of interspecies communication that has such encounters, you know, like you're coming out of a clutch of trees in the woods and unexpectedly find yourself face to face with some ungulate, with a mother moose, and her hooves raise and pound the ground. And I remember just the spray of snow then, and got that, whoa, this mama is very uptight. And then I look behind her when I see one of her ears swivel back, and there's a little moose or meese, or however it's said, behind her. And our eyes are just locked. And something feels like it's moving out of my right eye into her left eye, and out of her right eye into my left eye, and a kind of circuit is set up. And I'm just relaxing my innards. And without knowing why, my voice opens and I go, ha. And I notice her haunches just completely relax. And I take another gulp of air. Ah. And by the time that second tone dies out, I notice that the moose has so relaxed that she's just gone back down to nibbling on the willows. And I'm on a couple of clumsy wooden skis, and I just ski on past. But I'm thinking, whoa, what a magic, what a field of information is carried just in the sound of our voice. For those that have ears to hear it, that she could tell that this guy is not a problem. He's not ready to jump me. And so I realized then that this most significantly potent way of disarming the fright or the wariness between myself and another creature who's a lot bigger than me, and can take me down, is just to sing. To sing in words or without words doesn't matter, because so much is carried in the sound. but that's just, one example of hundreds of just this meeting with another shape of sentience. When something passes between you, and then you don't know for how long you've been in that trance, but it breaks. And who knows what's happened, except that you're changed. And you ain't never going to go back to who you were before you met that other, before you blended nervous systems just a bit before. Yeah. And it brings a sense of being inside something, being inside something vast, along with all these other shapes of sensitivity and sentience. That mind or sentience is not something in me. It's something I and the moose and the spider and this oak tree are all inside of. We're in it bodily, along with all the other bodies around. That's the sacred for me, is the experience of being inside something. Yeah.
Sophie, please go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, it was making me think of something you wrote recently, actually. I was seeing all these connections that was something I've been thinking about as well, which is that it's this porosity, it's this shared consciousness, this anima, this ruach that passes and metabolically loops us all, that is both profoundly enchanting and also agonizingly traumatic, that we live inside trauma geographies rather than being individuals with trauma. So I was thinking about when you wrote about that bio, I was very moved by that, because the first experience of my life is of being a porous being, able to go into the minds of my rapists and fully occupy that, and then occupy my own sentience and the ground. The ground of my being. If we can go into Moose's minds, we can go into the minds of the people who will violate us, and realize that we are not saved from that experience, that it's that Umwelt experience of violence that is also super important to understand and to complicate. And so for me, the sacred is also the moment to howl, when you realize that you are porous with the beings that do you harm, and you do them harm, and you embody, you're inside of this landscape that is a meshwork of bodies that are tipping into mutualisms and parasitisms and antagonistic conversations that are then sometimes flourishing and fermented, and that it's this moral complexity that is the sacred for me, where yes, I mean, David, I'll never forget reading in your book about what is it, the sea lions, and like calling to them, and it's like one of my favorite things I've ever read, which is just like the way you save yourself is by entering into that nonsense realm between species, where you're both, neither of you are talking your own language, but you're talking this language that lives in the interstitial. But I also think that exists inside these moments of extraordinary trauma, where someone is intra-bodily entering you. You're entering them. I mean, that's one of the complicated things I've always thought about, is as someone who's been violated, I can think like the violator. I've been in their minds. I've experienced their bodies. I've been in their shape, their nervous system. I'm not a victim. I'm an intra-participant in this experience that happened, this geography.
Oh.
I don't know if that was too rough.
I mean, there's a prayer we have back home in Nigeria: may your road be rough. That's when it gets interesting, right? The sacred is the disturbance that shakes us off from our complacency. Well, thank you so much, sister, for that. Yeah.
If I may say, bio, it's.
Yeah, I want to sit with that for a moment.
Allow me just to say that what this is about, again, going back, it's that sacred space of conversation. So while some of us are continuing to develop our comprehension, we're still using emotion, you know, until we understand and get above the emotion and approach it, you know, from an intellectual where it's just an instance of which she has, you know, assessed and analyzed. And so I don't take away in any which way. I just want to be able to set the tone and how she's introducing it here, because it's about that growth. It's about moving into that different levels of understanding where you're now able to see beyond yourself into the mind of the individuals who violated you. So don't look at the violation, just look at the relationship that she's exploring here, because that's really the important part, because there is violations all over. Mayo, what you had to run from was a violation, a grave one. So everybody has had that experience. It's just hers was specifically that. Yours was running for your life. David, whatever has brought you, you stared your life down off of the hoofs of a moose. We've all had, it's a moose. Okay. Much love and blessings, and I'm sorry for the interruption. I just wanted to get back into discussion.
Thank you, Proper. I want to just offer that I wasn't in any way offering this as some kind of polemic or disagreement. And I think what I was trying to say is actually what has opened us up to the moves oftentimes is that ground of shared cultural trauma that we're all inside of, that it's, you know, all three of us are inside the same experience of the Eurocentric ecocide. We're all inside of this. And in fact, I think it's that porosity that helps us be open to the moose. I mean, the interesting thing I was thinking about is, what is it like for the moose to look back at us and enter into our consciousness?
Exactly.
Yeah, because like, what is that moose thinking about in terms of its complicated, anthropogenically impinged environment? I mean, David, you're feeling this in your body right now with these fires around you right now. Like you're feeling what that moose may feel like all the time, which is that your environment is being pushed on and changed.
Indeed. Indeed.
That is how I heard. That is how I heard you, sister. We're co-weaving this ecstatic, this anthropocentric, you know, web, if you will, this nesting place together. So I receive it that way. Yeah.
Yeah. And I for one, don't wish to elevate above the emotion and the intensity and even the violation by which we become porous to that which is outside us and decant ourselves into what surrounds us. But again, there's also, I was hearing also in all of what was said, the echo of this, again, the interiority, feeling oneself, those moments when I find myself inside something vast, in the belly of the beast, in the belly of the whale, like Jonah, or in very much the cargo hold of those ships you speak about. Those slave ships carrying nightmares and torture and chained up sisters and brothers to be sold as slaves across the ocean, but also secretly carrying the trickster spirits, the gods, Eshu, Papa Legba, carrying the seeds as if the ships, like a seed pod, holding the seeds, carrying the seeds of polyrhythmic ecstasy that will become jazz will become rock and roll.
Hip hop.
Yeah, polyrhythmic ecstasy.
Yeah.
The inside, where so much happens, being in the depths of the sin.
I mean, this is what I constantly return to in both your works and your writing and your voices. It's this theme, this trope, if you will, of strange encounter. What the Yoruba people might speak of as a crossroads or orita, the place where the three roads meet, where Robert Johnson, I believe, met the devil, who tuned his guitar and damned him to be so sensuously attractive to the world, and his music to be so beautiful. The Yoruba people think of every highway as crossed through and broken open by things that will not be named. And in the fear and awe and joy and ecstasy of that, we scream aye, which British missionaries, we see aye, and then British missionaries came and translated that into life, which is a boring translation of that exclamation. But the exclamatory is like, it's like a giving, it's like a surrendering to things that exceed us. It's that, I've been reading this book by Laura Tripaldi, Parallel Minds, it's called, and it's basically about the interface. You know, what we usually think about as the interface, this infinitely thin line between bodies, right? We speak about the interface between us and technology, and that would be Facebook or an ergonomically presentable face that says, "Welcome, David. This is your operating system for the day." You know, that's how we think about interfaces. But Laura speaks about interface as this place of, you know, this marginally material region that has its own thickness and its own mass and its own imperatives, right? Like if you put a drop of water on a plane of glass, the drop of water suddenly congeals into the semi-spherical shape. You know, it's surface tension. What we want to know is that surface tension is not a property of the body of water, nor of the glass. It's a property of the interface, right? And that is a beautiful way of noticing that we are not in charge of the materials around us, that every relationship, everything we come into embodied contact with shapes us in return. And I think that's what the sacred, that's how it shows up in my body, as this interface, as the crossroads where the devil lives. Yes, the devil that opens the door to the slave ship, but also opens the door to candomblé at the self-same moment, that opens the door to trauma as the becomingness of the world, which we try to localize in language that is available to modern civilization, but also opens the door to post-traumatic growth, right? That opens the door to miracles, opens the door to shape-shifting secretions that will not be contained by our notions of healing and well-being. And that is the interface that the interface as the disturbing of data, right? Data as this violent and quotidian notion that we are above the fray, that the material is outside of us, and I can know the world in a final way and record it in a book and archive it in some, library. The interface, the crossroads tells us that no, every time we move, we are changed. We're reiterated in the moment. Our bodies are not ours. Identity is only a trace, an inadequate tracing of the promiscuity of the murmuration of bodies that we are constantly becoming. And to try to trace us, is to lose sight of the liminal flows, is to lose sight of the crossroads, is to disappoint the devil that is still waiting summarily as the agent of of emergence.
I love
Yes. Yay.
I feel I must apologize to my sister, Erin, who warned me before this conversation started that, Bio, if you use any big words, I will slap you upside the head. So, because she's translating behind the scenes. And this is a huge task listening to Sophie and David. So apologies to our dear translators.
Mm.
She says impossible.
Super quick interjection just for any listeners who find some of this off or very esoteric. It strikes me that the crossroads and the sense of the tricksters always being drawn and hanging out at the crossroads. If ever you're driving your automobile or riding your bike and you're coming to a traffic light up ahead, have you noticed that it's only just as you are arriving that the light switches to red? Just as you get there, no matter how long it's just happily been bright green, when you approach, bzz, turns to red. That's the crossroads. That's the tricksters.
Yeah. Right.
Hanging out there. Sophie.
I was loving this kind of process philosophy, like mantic, like flow coming through Bio, because this is really what I feel, and then I'm always trying to explain, which is that I like to say the body is a doorway. It's like a flesh silhouette for a Tower of Babel of microbial like slurry and all sorts of quorum sensing feelings that then we call an I. But what I really think of is that we are a pattern through which matter flows. And we can, when we begin to realize that and be more aware of it, we can decide what matter flows through us. And I think that right now we're living in a time where human narratives are the dominant theme. You know, Bio talks a lot about how like the thinking about the problem is part of the problem. Like, you know, our even here right now, the three of us, this is we're part of the problem right here, right now, talking in this way. And I was thinking about how can we begin to do what David was doing, which is just vocalizing to the moods. How can we become a mouthpiece for something else? And, you know, I shared this with Bio, and I think it's a point, a crossroads between me and Bio's thinking of at least, and I know, David, you've read Merlin Sheldrake's book, so you know about this as well, which is just, I always think of the Ophiocordyceps unilateralis fungi taking over the ant and driving it up the leaf so it bites and sporulates out of its head. And I think that in the best case scenario right now, I'm going to be that ant, which is I'm going to let something come through my doorway, and I'm going to start acting in a way that perhaps is bizarre, perhaps looks like rabies, perhaps looks like illness to someone else, but is in a divine vehicular service to some other story, a story that will not be legible in human language, but will be materially useful in expressing the sentience of something else and helping to reproduce. Like, I think in the best circumstances, a mushroom will come out of my head and I'm going to sporulate something that's very much not human. And I think that will probably look like nonsense singing, like stripping off my clothes, like doing things that are absolutely inappropriate.
Yeah, I was just teaching a couple short full-day workshops in the Bay Area the last few days. And we had a lot of work to do together, and we were supposed to be working off in some wilderness zone, but that ended up being closed to us. And so the organizers said, we got to work in the city. So there's this urban park, the Presidio here in the city. So we'll do these, you know, full-on day-long workshops here on the Sunday, and it's like, I was very dizzily nervous because there's lots of people out on a Sunday, families, dogs barking, catching frisbees, children screaming. How are we going to do this stuff? So we had us first gather in a little nook off in the trees among a sort of jungle gym of fallen trunks. and gathered our 35 people and said, look, folks, we're going to be out in this public park. We're going to have to be okay with being weird in front of folks who won't know what we're doing. So we're just going to practice being awkward. We're just going to take a stretch of time now and drop into this, but feel out how your body likes to move, eases its movements, and then come up against its limits and push past them. Be strange, and then stranger than strange. And just because we've got to get comfortable with at least being odd and weirdly strange in front of one another. Also, because I don't know any better way to shapeshift a culture with anything like the alacrity or speed at which we need to pull this off now, except just testing the body's ways of being and pushing past them, and then sounding, but sounding in as strange and odd and speaking otherwise with what I could talk. Because this is what all the other critters hear of us when we're speaking anyway. They don't know the dictionary definitions of our words. And so it's a kind of a way of bringing them into the conversation, even when we're speaking, every now and then, to slip out of the denotative language of words into sound, into just gestural sound and rhythm and textured voice. It sort of invites in the other critters. It's like in those folk traditions, folk songs, where there is a ditty about this and that, and then it breaks into, hey, diddle-a-day, won't, hey, diddle-a-day, bay-do, or something like that. And all the other animals just get that. It sort of opens the song, it opens the celebration onto them who don't speak in words, but speak in rhythm and melody and tone. Yeah.
You know, I've always had this this relationship with weirdness, not just inviting people into weird relationship with things around them, but the way that I see weirdness as not just an individual's performance, right? But a noticing, of coming to touch the impossible vastness of our bodies, that we are. And I say our bodies because I refuse to think along with the modern that insists that Sophie's body is the pixelated thing on my screen right now. Sophie is more diasporic than the edges might suggest, right? More seditious than those little edges. And that tells me that our bodies and our edges are in constant conversation with, just like the homunculus, right? Even the way that our brains see us is weird. We're internally misrecognized by our own bodies, right? To be recognized is already to be, to frame recognition within the conditions of misrecognition, if you get what I'm saying. But we are weird. And maybe the kind of politics we're reaching for is a weirdness, is a politics of weirdness, basically, a politics that invites us to touch the extremities, the tentacularities, the polarities, the ironies of our bodies, the sudden textures, the things that we're already a part of, so that becoming weird is not something we suddenly take off. It's something we've always been part of. We cannot be normal without the conditionality of weirdness, right? We've always been weird. Modernity is just the carceral dynamic that says, no, you're this thing here. Be prim and proper and be polite. Yeah, be here, be identified. But the world constantly beats against the box. The world constantly invites us to notice, no. You're not as righteous or as woke or as easy or as determined as you think you are. So it's the kind of politics that I'm really, and I feel that in David's words and your movements, and I'm constantly flawed by Sophie's insights into this. The politics is one that allows us to notice that there are times when, maybe I should start by saying this, that I see coloniality as a relationship between bodies and their prosthetics, right? That we use other bodies in order to be ourselves, right? We use furniture, we use the animal world, so to speak. We use bodies to be ourselves. Once in a while, so to speak, the prosthetics, mounts up an insurgency, right? And breaks through the realm, the surface, and insists that no, you're not as well put as you are. In those moments of cataclysmic invasions, one thing to do is to return everything to their prosthetic dependency, to insist that viruses remain in the place of viruses, to insist that education is about us, walking the straight and narrow, becoming more righteous, accumulating knowledge. But then another way to see this is as a wound. An invitation of a wound is to get up from where we are and to reframe our bodies, is to become weird. And maybe that's how, David, you just uttered a phrase right now, shape-shifting the culture. I think that is possibly the thing that keeps me up every night, that makes me go out and see the stars. It's my utmost dream to see something new, glimpsable, alien, something indescribable, to be flawed by something that I cannot name, that my big words will never be able to capture. That flooring is when a prosthetic breaks through the body and insists that it, as just as much as anything else, is also embodied, is also here.
And we're going to invite Fabrice to break into the conversation. He's been so strangely being spotlighted and taking off spotlight. I don't know what's happening there, but welcome.
Are you talking about the smoke, Dan?
It's everything. We're all touching and connecting to each other's edges, but now we have a
Elder Fabrice.
Yes, welcome.
Okay, now I had a question about.
Can you move closer to the microphone?
Yeah, hold on. I had a question about the use of metaphors. I was thinking about Sophie's, for example, talking about the leaven, and I was thinking, but maybe we need to move away from the idea that it's just a metaphor, even in parables. Like maybe it's recognizing, like it's a worlding that recognizes the entangled earth realm of reality. Leaven is just that, not just a metaphor, it's just something to do with what is real.
Yeah.
And I thought about, there is this one Melanesian tribe that thinks that metaphors are sort of really childish, and they even have a word which is like an adult should resist the temptation of, they have an expression, makai. Makai is the temptation to turn a sudden insight into a metaphor that explains things. And they say you should hold on to the insight and wait until you can deposit it into a wider network of thoughts. And that is what makes you in connection, and you can see the faces of the dead. So this destructuring metaphor and placing into a wider network of perception also has to do with our relationship with the more than human or non-human in our ancestry. And I found that idea very interesting about the sacred, like the debunking of metaphor as, like a cognitive form allows a deeper sort of epistemology or understanding of reality. So I wanted to bring that as a question.
think metaphor has been it's been interpreted by chirographic textual culture as being a way of thinking two unlike things, but in paratactical oral culture, it's actual connective tissue, not metaphorical connective tissue. When something is connected to something else, metaphor means to carry over. It's what Bio and David are both talking over. It's the actual material carrying over of you to another being. And you're speaking that in breath that is real. As you speak it into the world, it disappears along your breath and goes into the actual body of the thing you are creating the metaphor with. It is an actual corporeal interpenetration. So I think we always have to complicate how textual culture has created this fictional idea of what language is when it lives through the body. And, you know, I owe a lot of how I understand this to David Spell of the Sensuous. And I actually think that metaphor, when we reroute it in the body, shows us the actual relationships that build us. I mean, it's funny that you brought up the leaven, because I've been thinking lately that what if civilization, we're so focused that civilization is a human story, but if we look at like these intense cities, they seem to fall right along with wild grasses and fermentation and leaven. What if civilization, the kingdom really is leaven? What if it is a fungal narrative that's using us as its prosthesis?
Yeah.
And I think that it's always important to begin to problematize our own agency within these complicated, entangled materialities. So I just want to reframe metaphors actually being an incredibly material entanglement if we reroute it in its, you know, ultimate base as an oral tradition, and more paratactical, less like creating an incision and more an you know, everything is strung together.
Just a quick, okay, so David, you go, brother.
Oh, brother, please.
No, you go. We can go. I could do this all day. I could do this.
I really love Fabrice's question and what Sophie just offered in here. Yeah, I want to say, Fabrice, perhaps like you, I'm always looking for metaphors that are more than just metaphors, that are, you know, if someone says, if I say the earth breathes, oh, at first that's okay, that's a metaphor. Earth isn't breathing, we're breathing. But then you quickly begin to realize, wait a minute, we're able to breathe because all these plants are breathing out the oxygen that all us creatures are taking in, and we're breathing out then the carbon infused air that all the plants are breathing. So, whoa, actually Earth breathes is way more than a metaphor. It actually transforms my understanding of what it is for me to breathe. I think that edge that Sophie was speaking to between the literate and the oral, the much older oral pluriverse in which our human bodied form danced for, you know, for so long, for 99% of our human tenure here, and then as other bodies before that. But we were deeply, deeply oral in our relation to the land long before we stepped into the regime of formal writing and different writing systems. In an oral culture, language itself is born in a kind of call and response to a speaking world, a world that where everything speaks. And it seems to me that it's only with the advent of writing, and of course, different writing systems do this in very different ways, but particularly phonetic writing, or what we could call the alphabet, that there is this writing-induced rift between, literal truth on one hand and figurative or metaphoric truth on the other, because it happens there when you start writing down. Then, is that literally true? And literal truth, we forget, is an artifact of literacy. It is as recent as that. Literal truth, sisters, is an artifact of literacy. It originally means being true to the letter of the law. Is that what it says in the letter of scripture? Is that what it says on the page? And then we project it out into the world and say, is it literally true, David, that that boulder spoke to you? To which I have to say, no, it's not literally true, but it spoke to me. I'm after a layer of meaning and truth that is much older than that split between literal and figurative, or literal and metaphoric, to open up that oral depth and wake up my oral storytelling body, is to find ways of speaking that are rich with imagistic dancing, what we would call metaphors, but the metaphoric discourse is at every point embodied. It's about the actual world. It's about what's really going on between things and my body and these root systems and these gusts of wind. It's palpable, it's real. So when the old ones would say, certain powers and gods live in the underworld, I'm quite sure they're speaking about not some other realm we just access with our imagination. They're speaking of under the ground on which we walk and lay down at night to sleep right under that. That's the underworld.
David scratched my itch. So that's I was going to say something about truth, Elder Fabrice. But maybe I'll add this, that, and Fabrice, you've heard me say this many times, that my people say, in order to speak, one must speak from the corners of one's mouth. In order to speak wisdom, you must speak from the corners of one's mouth. There's something about not speaking straightforwardly, speaking in a zigzag way that escapes the surveillance of truth, right? And I'm of the opinion, along with people like Karen Barad, that language has been given too much power, right? We've given language too much power, but at the same time, I think we've kind of, language does not exist as some idealistic, predetermined or pre-given entity, right? It's language within, or language as an effect of certain social arrangements. And I think language has been imprisoned to do certain kinds of tasks, one of which is to arrive summarily at what David had already scratched for me, the truth, right? The final resting place of all ontologies. and I'm, I don't come from a people that trust in such arrivals. There is only example. There is only the figure, right? We don't have a word for metaphor as a result. We don't have a word that suggests that you can step outside of, because language is ecological for us. Language is secreted in the ferment of bodies, the interface, the interactive spaces that we're always a part of. So language has been given too much power because it is a servant of civilizational coloniality. But outside of that, there is a way, and I love the way Sophie spoke about corporeal interpenetration, that language is already material. Language is already material, is already fugitive, is already beautiful, and consequently more than this subjugated subject of the metaphor or of binaries.
Excellent. Thank you for that beautiful question and those beautiful responses. Before welcoming Anasuya in to ask her question, I just want to name that we're at the time that we had put on the original poster. So if
Dan, there was no space for African time.
Beautiful. That's what I was hoping for. It seems like it's still flowing, but I do want to also acknowledge if people do need to drop off, feel free. Sophie, David, if you have to drop off, it's totally okay.
No, but I would like to just tag on to something my brother just said there before we open up to another beautiful question, which is, just want to say a word for that. Language is not just a tool of the truth, and it is not just this carceral power that closes our senses and filters them, so that language has this bodacious creativity. I mean, we're two-legged, we're humans. We seem to secrete language among us like bees secrete honey. And I do think it's a very recent confusion or glitch, yes, that we've come to associate and think that what our verbal language is good for is representing the world, is about things and coming up with a picture of how it all fits together. A representation of things. Language, even verbal language, it just couldn't do that much before you start writing it down. Once I write down the word oak tree, then I can see the word. I've got the visible word and the visible oak tree, and I can take that word as a label for the tree. And I write down hummingbird, and I've got that label, a visible label for the actual hummingbird. But before you write it down, it just, language, it's like, it's invocation, it's blessing. It's not, its primary use was never to represent the world as if the world wasn't, speaking all the time and listening into us as we speak. But its primary use, I feel, its deeply oral use is a way of singing to the world and singing oneself into relation with the world, not to talk about the mountain, but to call out to the mountain. Yay! So good to see you again this morning. And it's like with the ways we use our words when we say something as simple as, I love you, to our sweetheart. That's language. It bridges the strange gaps and rich differences between us and reaches across that gap and touches the other, sings toward the other, and then listens and waits for the reply. Just wanted to say that too.
Beautiful. Yes, Sophie.
But this ties to something I've been thinking about, and you kept coming back to the word touch, David. And I've been thinking a lot about how most of our senses are actually haptic, haptikos, meaning to touch, but also to fasten. So that touch is always a kind of a hybridity, a joining, and that sound, is actually haptic. It is this domino cascade of molecules pushing into your eardrum and into your head. And when you touch a lover, you're not thinking about the content of the description that you are giving to them. You are thinking about how to touch them, to communicate something. And what if language suddenly was about how to touch someone with love, rather than any kind of content or meaning? What if it was a type of very animal-like intimacy, and that our words, their sound, we have maybe conflated that with some kind of meaning, but really it's actually a shape. It's the vocalization is really an actual physical shape that has a kind of touch information, a kind of biosemiotic pressure that is so sub-perceptual to what we think it's communicating. How can we think of language as as not being about accomplishing some kind of description or meaning, but about being a way of physically touching someone? And that's where music, of course, for me is the most resonant way of doing this. It dances off from that sense and into that place where you are describing experience without any sense of trying to accomplish something. Yeah.
Right.
Bless you, sister. That's just how I think of it.
Antanasuya?
My brother, what's up? Hello, good morning, Sophie. Good morning, David. We've not met, but I'm Anasuya. And I'm just loving this. I was supposed to be somewhere at 10 a.m. Too bad. I'm not moving. So I just wonder, there's so many things anyway, I'm going to pick up on the last thing that just had me on fire. So The last thing is this whole thing about language being literal, importance of nailing it to the letter of the law. And for me, that points back to that time in history when the intercessors or the priestesses were women, and it moved to male representations of the embodiment of the divine or God or authority. When that switch happened is when it went from experiential moments that came from intuition, that came from communion with the earth, that came communion with the stars, and it moved to writing as the death of the goddess and the death of the mother worship and the matriarchy. Because once it became that those rites and those sacred ceremonies became experiential, they couldn't be controlled. They could be like, everyone could have the experience of the Holy Spirit. They could have the experience of that enlivening entity moving through them, and it was real, and it was a collective force that made them at one with each other and with the earth and with the divine. And the minute words became written, and only men created these damn letters and created the truth of what they put in the letters and put in the rules that they put in the letters. And then only people who could read those letters were the big badass, and everybody else was like, oh, you're less than. That's where that shift took place, when we went from matriarchal, loving, goddess worship, the mother god, the grand mater, to less than, not as important, not as special, because there was no proof of her existence in the word. So is a letter to the law? Well, there's no mother god in there, so she can't be real. We don't worship her anymore. And that's that inability to trust your own experience, trust your own porosity, as you say, trust our own ability to be in fluid communion with the all is. That is our imprison. This is how modernity squashes us into these self-loathing, self-doubting, less than entities, because there is a higher power, and it's in the word, it's written down. Like, how many times have I had that conversation when people say it's not in the Bible, so it ain't real? Well, how about that? So when you talk about communion with the moose, or communion with your violator, we're talking about the experience of that which is beyond that action, beyond that moment, beyond that body that is the most. We're talking about experiencing that place of communion where there is the merging, there's Tom and there's Mary, and then there's that third entity called Tamari. That if you awake to, you know that there is this third entity that is that mixing, or as Bio calls it, the interfacing of you two that you didn't know existed until you smash molecules through the ear. That touch me. Even if you said something effed up, you still touch me, and I have a reaction to it. And what am I going to do with that? And I can allow myself to be corporally penetrated, by the oneness and the energy of their violence, or I can transmute it myself with my intention and say, you meant this for bad, but I'm gonna transmute it into good, because I see the God in you, even if you don't. Even in this moment, you don't even believe there is one. I can see it so greatly that you will be enveloped by the truth of your being and shift. And that's the power of the words, the language that you three are summoning for me. And I'm so grateful to remember to go back to the experience that can't be controlled by the law, that can't be controlled by words, that can't be controlled and dominated, because my experience is real and you can't tell me it's not. Mm-hmm. Because we have to take back that agency of our experiences, of the smudge, of the fires, of the waters, of the moose, of the violence, of the people shooting people up because they got nothing to do with their anger but kill. I have to, the whole 45 era, as in President 45, I had to constantly look for, okay, where am I this asshole? Where am I this person that is completely self-centered. Where am I, the person who could give a flying F about anyone else because it's all about me? I mean, that is in me. And I'm telling you, that took some work to not spend any energy hating that being, because that was so easy. But to see me, see him and me, that wasn't easy. So I just, I thank you for bringing up this whole conversation. So I guess I have to say thank you, Fabrice. Merci, chérie, to even bring up this whole conversation of metaphor, because that's the gateway to like remembering that oneness that is pre-language, that is in the breath, that's in our touching, that's in our being together, you know, that we got to go back to. Because these silos we're in is making a hella crazy folks that when they burst out the silos, it's usually very harmful. And so I thank you so much for this conversation about how to return to the sacred. Because for me, we have to go back to the mother. If we don't, we ain't gonna get to the truth. Because sacred starts with that wombing time. That was sacred. That birthing out is sacred. That bursting out of the placenta is sacred. And then we get to this earth and modernity tells us, well, about that. We got to go back to
Thank you, Auntie.
Thank you, three.
Yeah. I'm very well. I'm also mindful of the time. I don't know what Dan wants us to do right now. Break out into a dance. Do we all twerk together? Sophie,
we could twerk.
David, we can twerk.
This is good. We can keep this flowing.
We can twerk.
It's a bit more time, and then we'll break out and twerk after that.
Twerking is where it's at. I'm very, very. Is the word fearful? Wary about inclusionary politics, right? It's the kind of politics that brings back in, you know, the kind of politics that I've been subjected to, right? When I've been told to speak truth to power. And that's important. When I've been told to and if only people like you can train yourselves, learn the books, perhaps get a PhD, you know, climb the ladders, then that would be justice, that would be truth, that would be arrival, that would be squaring both sides of the equation. And I've been, there is a sense in which some of us notice the violence of that inclusionary dynamic, that call to join us at the table, which might seem on the surface of things invitational and innocent. But at the other side of things, or through another breath, there's nothing more violent than placing the verb before, after the subject, right? You know, in the way that the English language positions action as a formula of subject, verb, and object. There's nothing more violent than situating the verb between and not noticing that we are aspects of the world in its becoming. The verb precedes us, if you will. And to situate a politics that is only tethered to bringing people, more people in, is to forget that the world is open, is this open-ended emergence that will not attract. So as I sit with these beautiful sibling voices and invitations to the sacred and invitations to see language as more than representational, as the conjuration of what it might yet be and what is yet to come, and what might yet have been. I'm really thankful for the grammar that is emerging, the grammar outside of SVO, subject, verb, object, that is emerging in our context and is emerging as a result of this convening, that is telling me in my bones that I don't need to fit in, because there isn't a fitting in an open-ended emergent world. There is only sitting with and a listening to and a being listened by and a sharing together in the middle, in the always curdling middle, in the ocean of curds we mistakenly call reality.
Mm.
Mm.
Man, that's good right there.
Mm. Mm.
I like this, disrupting the grammar, not following the verb. Wow. Not being objectified, because if we're objectified, we're othered. And if we're othered, then we can be possessed, sold, bought. We can be imprisoned. We can be given a QR code stamped on us, you know, when you're objectified. So yeah, let me not be the object of your shitty verb.
I also love thinking about how, you know, one of the main tools of the Roman Empire and imperialism was making everybody speak a common Hellenized language. Everybody had to learn the same language. And I'm thinking about like, what would it be to embrace a Tower of Babel where no one really understands each other and everyone is speaking slightly different languages all the time? And it's those moments of like half understanding something, misunderstanding something, something fertile is born through the misunderstanding. Yeah, I'm ready for us to have a hard time understanding each other rather than all speaking a sterile, unhelpful language that just reifies the oppressive system. Yeah,
that confusion, sister, that confusion is the blessing, right? Every time the sacred comes in, it breaks a leg, right? Right. It's God or the angel meeting Jacob by the river, you know, in isolation, and like I will not leave until you bless me. And God proceeds to break his leg and then renames him, right? Every time the sacred comes in, I think we've been swayed by prosperity gospels. We've been swayed by scatological, salvific theologies that tell us that the Messiah is at the end of time, at the end of history. I think that salvation is here, and we right here, right now. And it's not even salvific. It's an invitation to stay with the trouble. That confusion, when the gods descended and confused our languages, that was the creation event right there, not Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, right? It was the creation event with confusion, breaking the bones, burning the lips of Moses so that he could not speak eloquently. He could only speak with a lisp. That is the theology of the moment. That is making new gods at the end of time.
Beautiful. Before we break out to start twerking, I want to welcome Brother Henry in, as he's had his hand up for quite some time.
Hi, Henry.
Hey, it's great to see you all. And this was such a wonderful conversation, and I was really like, it really lights me up to think about these things. And I was especially, I felt a lot in the conversation around metaphor, because I've been thinking about, you know, I just led a workshop last weekend where I was having people do very weird things, like playing and engaging their bodies in a way they might not be used to. And self-consciousness enters into that heavy duty. Like people get very self-conscious when you ask them to step out of the normal boundaries of what's considered, you know, how a human body should stand and move, and you know, how we ought to speak. But also, I think one element of that self-consciousness is the believing something that is wrong or literally untrue in order to step into an experience that's stranger than the one you'd have without that belief, like trying on a lens of a different way of seeing something. And I noticed so much hesitance, even when, or I guess I should say, when people feel that they're asked to, for instance, see a tree or bush or rock as a speaking, living entity that you can engage with in an animistic way, with wonder, with compassion, with sincerity. Immediately there's this self-conscious criticism of, well, I can't do that because that's not literally what it is. And I wonder if one path, I think of John Moriarty, who's one of my favorites. I try to bring him into pretty much every conversation I have because he's not known very much on this side of the Atlantic. But he has a story of the, and I'll be very brief, but just this boulder outside of this town in Ireland, and a father's talking to his son, and the father says, "Did you know that on Samhain every year that boulder becomes an old woman driving her cart through the village?" And the son says, "Well, I can't believe that because it's a boulder." And the father says this line, which is if in the eyes of the world you aren't embarrassed by your beliefs about the world, you can conclude that the wonder eye, which is in all of us, hasn't yet opened in you. And what I love about that quote is that it emphasizes perception and experience. Wonder eye, you see out of your eyes. You don't think out of your eyes. That's what allows you to enter into this other way of being. It's not that you have to believe and convince yourself and philosophically argue with your brain that the rock is a being or an entity, or believe or buy into any particular philosophical argument. You just have to be willing to play, willing to step into a mode of being and engaging and experiencing, and then the metaphor becomes reality. Then the distinction between metaphoric and literal becomes just. I guess the point I'm getting to, or the question I'm asking, is could it be that the branching point of those two, the metaphor or literal on one side, is an intellectual branching point, and on the level of direct experience of the world, it's actually, as Moriarty says another point, a world of worlds, a world in which there is a coming and going between worlds, where simultaneity of possibility can exist, where something can be a rock and and this is a plaything, a magic artifact. A lot of my stuff revolves around playing like you would as a kid in the woods kind of thing, and so much imagination, so much possibility. What if it could be all of that stuff at once? And what if it's about getting the experience of that and not arguing over where the truth is outside of that? And I'll stop there so I'm not rambling, but curious about thoughts on that. And thanks again.
You guys want to go first?
This is something I'm thinking about a lot, Henry. And I've been thinking a lot about how we do a lot of predictive processing in the brain, and we gate out most of our stimuli, and most of what we see is what we expect to see rather than what is actually happening. Like if there was a goat in the sink, we might not see it because we're so expecting to see the sink in our kitchen like it usually is. And that can be a good thing in that it stabilizes our world, but it means that, yeah, we gate out the aliveness of the world. And that in earlier cultures, we were doing that sensory gating to read weather patterns and find fruit and make actual ecological decisions. But now we do it in a very strict service level way. And I've been trying to tell people lately, I think it takes an enormous amount of work to gate out those adjacent possibles, that actually it's less about doing the work to embody those experiences and feel that magic, and more about just relaxing, relaxing this constant, actually holding our jaws shut, holding reality at bay, trying so hard to homogenize the stimuli that we're receiving and just relax it. I mean, I think this is why people are going to this heroic dose extractive psychedelic experience, because they think they can just take a drug and it'll happen. But the truth is, it'll happen if you sit somewhere day after day after day after day, and you just sit there and you notice what arrives. Is slowly you're going to get tired of holding up that sensory scaffolding, and a new color is going to come in, something strange. And so I think that, I think that it's less about teaching. It's funny you brought up play. I think it's less about teaching people, and it's more about tiring them out with play so that they can't keep this stuff up anymore. Yeah, that's just my
think Moriarty says also that we maintain this enchantment with multifarious immense energy, the enchantment of the everyday world. And he says, like a Medusa mindset, we project this hard rockiness onto everything. And I love that connotation of it's something we are doing two things. We're trying to put on things. And then if we just release that projection of a flat reality, then we can let the many forms of it back in. I love that.
I love that as well, the way you frame it, Sophie. It brings to mind this line from Dogen, great 12th century or thereabouts Zen patriarch, somewhere in his Shobogenzo Genjo Koan, he says, it's a famous line, roughly translated, says that the self advances and realizes the 10,000 things is delusion. That the 10,000 things stand forth and realize themselves is enlightenment. By which I take it, he means simply that at those moments when I am really awake, when I'm like really awake, I cannot help but notice that everything else is also awake. Everything. The stone, the gust of wind, the cloud overhead, that mountain, this river, that bobcat, this hawk, and the spider crawling up my face. It's all awake, including that boulder that turns into that marvelous woman.
Hello? Yes, this is she.
So just in keeping also with what we've been sharing here, I want to say that touching that playfulness you practice and inspire in others, Henry, that it seems, I can't help but feel like Bio's work very, very much, Sophie, what you are up to, certainly what I am given to as a kind of technique, an audacious tactic to meet the wild storms gathering on the horizon, is the practice of rejuvenating oral culture, not to the exclusion of written culture. I love books and I'm a writer. I love to read, nor to the exclusion of the internet and the computer screens, which ain't going away. But leaving some space in our days for an interaction with one another and with language and verbal language that is not mediated by the flat screen nor by the flat page of a book, but that happens with my whole body out in the land, inviting people to gather, telling stories with our whole creaturely flesh, face to face, replenishing the culture of face to face and face to place storytelling. Face to place storytelling, storying up the land. There's no restoring the local earth anymore without restoring the land, letting some stories live in the place where they happen or where the events in those stories first met us, and letting the place carry those tales so we don't write them down so they can be carried onto other places and distant continents, and all that place-specific scrumptiousness in the tale, it begins to be forgotten. Let some of our tales live only on the tongue when we're in the place, and the place speaks them. It's a kind of secret and rather magical way of returning speech, meaningful speech, to the whole of the terrain.
Thank you, David. Thank you. That sounds like home. It sounds like home, a home I'm used to, the home I long for. And I was going to also say to Henry, that I think we inherited this legacy of, you might say it's from the Enlightenment, you might say it's from those Western conversations about what makes knowledge, right? That were tracked into the, the cartography of this is empiricism and or rationalism. We know we know before sensorial input, or we know after sensorial input. We received this aphorism that has lived through our cities and urban settlements for a long time, that seeing is believing. And there's something quite reductionistic about that, right? Seeing is believing. There's something that almost tracks with this idea, which you may have uttered with a sentence, that we see out of our eyes, But there is a sense in which we are learning that seeing is not the bedrock, right, that we think it is. That seeing is an interface, right? Just as there are multiple bodies, there are multiple scenes, and vision is not just, vision, I might just say, is non-representational. We don't represent the world outside of us so much as we participate in it and create it. We co-create it. Seeing is participatory invitation. Seeing is a meeting in the middle. So that you might say that seeing is believing if you also agree that playing is seeing. To play is to see, right? That there is this, that the bedrock is not a bedrock at all. It's screaming children in a playground, still figuring out what this sensorial mass of, streaming fugitive becomings are doing. So I think of believing then as a strategy. Believing is a non-representational strategy of approach where there is no arrival. It is a means without an end. It is a worlding event. If only if you see believing through the prisms of enlightenment truth with a capital T, does believing become the ideological tribalistic architecture that we are part of today. But if we see believing as this invitation to come to the crossroads, a marketplace, and share the species of beans that we have in our hand and speak about that and say, here's my color of beans. What's your color of beans? What have you been able to grow in your backyard? Then it becomes more than just this public order. This public order that rules out Black bodies, the public order that rules out human, more than human bodies, the public order that situates and tracks and, only calibrates itself to the idea of progress and development and all those things that we are tired of today, but don't know how to speak into being. So let me just end with this, that my daughter, many years ago, 6 years ago, I think, when she was 2 years old in Richmond, Virginia, took me out to swim, except that I don't know how to swim. And she didn't as well, but she said she wanted to go to the swimming pool. And I told myself as an experiment, and I've written about this in my book and shared it many times, I told myself that I was going to say yes to everything she said that day. I think I just watched the movie Yes Man by Jim Carrey. I don't know, but it was supposed to be this experiment where I said yes to everything she said as a way of meeting her in her toddling epistemologies. So she said, Dada, let's go swim. And so I said, yes, let's go swim. And so she dragged me by my pinky and in my awkward slippers, and we ambled and went to the swimming pool, except she wasn't going to the swimming pool. She was going to the lake, right? And I tried to assure her that this is the way to the swimming pool. There it is right there, swimming pool, safe and blue and tidy. But she was going to the lake, and she said, let's go to the lake. No, she didn't say let's go to the lake. She said, let's go to the swimming pool, pointing at the lake. I said yes to that. And then it started to get real awkward. She stopped me. I think she had already figured out that I was part of this experiment. And so she started to study me, so to speak. And she said, Dada, take off your slippers and wear mine. And so I squeezed my feet into her tiny slippers, and she wore my giant slippers. And we, drunkenly arrived at the lake. And she was quiet just strangely quiet, just staring at the lake. And I thought to myself, this is a good father-daughter moment. How about I tell her about her people or her grandfathers that she never met? How about I make this a Kodak moment, make it picturesque? And so I started to speak to her, and then she shushed me. She really said, shh, listen, shh. And then I just stood still. The hair on my neck stood on end, and I just shut my trap. and for a moment, Sophie just beautifully articulated it, when our sensorial schemas just buckle under the weight of glory, you know, the ruach, the kadosh of the world, and it presses in the sacred. And for a moment, it's as if the world burst into technicolor. Like I had not noticed a hue of blue that was just at the side, you know, the animal side of my eyes, you know, the edges of my eyes, that there was some color I did not know how to name. It just came into view, standing there with my daughter, you know, at the edge of a lake, that ordinary moment. Of course, the story continues, but I think if we're to think about the sacred through education, if we're to think education through the sacred, through the animal, through emergence, through the processual, then we come to a place of utter ecstatic silence, where we're being invited to shut our traps and listen as if for the first time to a deer stamping its ground, to an ant just walking to the market, to the glory of the things that will not be named.
Wow. So to close, I think following with that, maybe we can invite another awkward silence. Again, it could be half a second, 10 seconds, 12 seconds, 20 seconds. And then I invite Bio, David, and Sophie, if you have any closing words, anything that you want to, closing is not the right word, continuing words, or words that we can carry with us as we move away from this space and into the next space. So I'm just gonna, again, invite a little bit of silence, and then each of you are welcome to share. And if you feel satiated already, no need to share, but I'll leave that up to you.
After listening to David and Sophie and Anastasia and Fabrice and Henry, and even our silences from those of us who haven't spoken, I think right now I would rather just twerk. If there were music, I would twerk right now, but there ain't no music. So I would twerk outside the screen.
I think it's hard to step out from a conversation so pleasureful. Such food. Maybe poem by what to choose. Maybe this one by Rilke, Rainer Maria Rilke, our brother in heart and synesthetic weirdness. Yeah. But Rilke says, "Dear darkening ground, you've endured so patiently the walls we've built. Perhaps you'll grant the cities one more hour, and the churches and synagogues too. And those who labor, will you let their work grip them another 5 hours? or 7 before you become ocean again, and forest, and widening wilderness in that hour of unspeakable terror when you take back your name from all things. Just grant me a little more time. I want to love the things as no one has thought to love them until they are worthy of you and real.
I'm just floored that I got to talk with both of you. And if we're talking about interpenetration and things, I am a composite of both of you. You know, we were asked to bring an elder on to speak, and I was like, then it should be Bio or David, because you guys are my elders. So I just want to note that and say thank you so much for weaving me in. Yeah. My one little poetic thing that I always want to offer is just Linda Hogan's end to her poem, The Way In, which is to enter life, be food. It's a way of listening, is to make yourself food.
Oh.
Eat and be eaten by. Yes. Love you guys. This has been this. Let's do this again. Over food, perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe in person soon enough.
There you go. There. Not digital food, David.
No.
It has to be in person.
Yeah, I don't want to eat food from the screen.
No.
Sophie, thank you so much, dear sister.
Thank you, both of you. All right.
Bio, blessings on you and your beautiful family, brother.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. Love you, Sophie. Thank you.
Thank you all. And for those of you that want to stick around for the cafe space, we'll take a 10 or 15-minute break and then come back for some informal conversation. And in the meantime, we'll have some music to bridge this transition.
So many years, I just realized I've been lacking self-love. Hard on my own self, my heart constantly constrained by my brain. Love that never